Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that a significant, unexpected operational issue has arisen within a publicly traded company, potentially impacting its financial performance. The leadership team is aware of the issue, but is still gathering all necessary facts and assessing the full scope of its implications. The Chartered Leadership Fellow responsible for stakeholder relations must decide how to communicate this developing situation. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory frameworks and ethical leadership principles for communicating with stakeholders in this scenario? Option A. Develop a comprehensive, factual statement for immediate public release, outlining the known details of the operational issue, its potential financial impact, and the steps being taken to address it, while acknowledging that further information will be provided as it becomes available. Option B. Issue a brief holding statement indicating that the company is aware of an operational matter and is investigating, without providing any specific details or timelines for further updates, to avoid speculation. Option C. Communicate the developing situation and potential financial implications directly and exclusively to major institutional investors and key financial analysts to ensure they are informed ahead of the general market. Option D. Post an informal update on the company's social media channels, encouraging employees to share their understanding of the situation to foster transparency and employee engagement. Correct answer is A. Develop a comprehensive, factual statement for immediate public release, outlining the known details of the operational issue, its potential financial impact, and the steps being taken to address it, while acknowledging that further information will be provided as it becomes available. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for transparency with the potential for market sensitivity and the fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. Leaders must navigate complex communication landscapes, ensuring all stakeholders receive timely, accurate, and appropriate information without causing undue disruption or providing an unfair advantage. The Chartered Leadership Fellow designation implies a responsibility to uphold the highest ethical standards and regulatory compliance in all stakeholder interactions. The correct approach involves a carefully orchestrated communication strategy that prioritizes factual accuracy, regulatory compliance, and equitable information dissemination. This means developing a clear, concise, and consistent message that addresses the core issue without speculation or premature disclosure of sensitive details. It requires identifying all relevant stakeholders, tailoring communication to their specific needs and regulatory obligations, and ensuring that information is released through appropriate channels at the right time. This approach upholds the principles of good corporate governance, fairness, and transparency, aligning with regulatory expectations for public companies and professional conduct. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, unfiltered public disclosure of all internal deliberations and potential outcomes would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of judgment regarding market sensitivity and the potential for misinformation or panic. It disregards the regulatory requirement to avoid selective disclosure and the ethical obligation to manage information responsibly. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay communication indefinitely until all potential scenarios are fully resolved, is also professionally unacceptable. This failure breaches the duty of timely disclosure and can erode stakeholder trust. It also risks violating regulations that mandate prompt reporting of material events. Furthermore, withholding information can create an environment where rumors and speculation flourish, leading to greater market volatility and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on communicating with a select group of influential stakeholders while excluding others, is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This constitutes selective disclosure, which is a serious breach of fairness and can lead to insider trading concerns and regulatory penalties. It undermines the principle of equitable treatment for all investors and stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment of communication strategies. Leaders should consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure adherence to all relevant regulations. They should consider the impact of their communication on different stakeholder groups and the broader market. Developing pre-approved communication protocols for various scenarios can also enhance preparedness and ensure a consistent, ethical, and compliant response. The core principle is to communicate truthfully, fairly, and in a manner that supports informed decision-making by all stakeholders while protecting the integrity of the market. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a significant compliance breach if a new product is launched without further due diligence, but the market opportunity is time-sensitive and projected to yield substantial immediate returns. The head of product development is advocating for an immediate launch, citing competitive pressure and the potential for first-mover advantage, while the chief compliance officer is urging a delay to conduct a thorough review of the product's alignment with all relevant financial services regulations. As a chartered leadership fellow responsible for the strategic direction of the firm, how should you approach this decision? Option A. Develop an entirely novel launch strategy that bypasses traditional regulatory hurdles, focusing solely on capturing market share rapidly. Option B. Prioritize a comprehensive, rational evaluation of all potential outcomes, including detailed regulatory impact assessments and risk mitigation strategies, before making a launch decision, even if it means delaying market entry. Option C. Rely on the experience of the head of product development and the perceived urgency of the market opportunity to make a swift launch decision, assuming minor compliance issues can be addressed post-launch. Option D. Defer the decision to the most vocal stakeholder, balancing their immediate concerns without a structured evaluation of long-term consequences. The correct answer is B. Prioritize a comprehensive, rational evaluation of all potential outcomes, including detailed regulatory impact assessments and risk mitigation strategies, before making a launch decision, even if it means delaying market entry. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires a leader to balance immediate operational needs with long-term strategic implications and regulatory compliance. The pressure to act quickly, coupled with incomplete information and potential stakeholder concerns, necessitates a robust decision-making process. Careful judgment is required to avoid impulsive actions that could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, or suboptimal outcomes. The correct approach involves a structured, rational decision-making model. This model emphasizes defining the problem clearly, gathering relevant information, identifying alternatives, evaluating them based on objective criteria, including regulatory adherence and potential impact, selecting the best option and implementing it. This systematic process ensures that all relevant factors, including compliance with the Chartered Leadership Fellow (CLF), regulatory framework and ethical considerations, are thoroughly considered. Specifically, the CLF framework mandates a duty of care and a commitment to acting in the best interests of clients and the firm, which aligns with a rational, evidence-based decision-making process. This approach minimizes the risk of overlooking critical compliance issues or making decisions based on incomplete or biased information, thereby upholding professional standards and regulatory obligations. An intuitive decision-making approach, while sometimes useful for experienced professionals, is incorrect in this context because it relies heavily on gut feeling and past experience without explicit analysis of the current situation's unique regulatory and ethical dimensions. This can lead to overlooking subtle but critical compliance requirements or ethical nuances, potentially resulting in regulatory violations or actions that are not in the best interest of stakeholders, contrary to the CLF's duty of care. A purely creative decision-making approach, focusing on novel solutions without rigorous evaluation against established regulatory frameworks and ethical principles, is also incorrect. While innovation is valuable, it must be grounded in compliance and ethical responsibility. Unchecked creativity could lead to solutions that, while innovative, are not permissible under current regulations or could create unforeseen ethical dilemmas, thus failing to meet the professional standards expected of a chartered leadership fellow. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates rational analysis with informed intuition and creativity when appropriate, but always prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. This involves a cyclical process of problem identification, information gathering, option generation, rigorous evaluation against predefined criteria, including regulatory and ethical standards, selection, implementation, and review. Question 3. Consider a scenario where a high-performing project team, having successfully delivered a complex initiative ahead of schedule and under budget, is now nearing its disbandment. As the leader responsible for this team, you are aware that the project's success was heavily reliant on the unique collaborative synergy developed over several months. You need to ensure that the team's dissolution is managed in a way that maximizes organizational benefit and respects the contributions of each member, while adhering to the professional standards expected of a chartered leadership fellow. Which of the following approaches best navigates the adjourning stage of team development in this context? Option A. Allow team members to organically transition out of the project as their individual tasks are completed, with no formal leadership intervention or structured debriefing. Option B. Immediately reassign team members to new, urgent projects, instructing them to focus solely on their new responsibilities and to consider the previous project concluded without further discussion. Option C. Facilitate a comprehensive team debriefing session to capture lessons learned, celebrate achievements, and formally acknowledge individual and collective contributions, while also outlining clear next steps for knowledge transfer and individual career transitions. Option D. Focus exclusively on documenting the final project outcomes for reporting purposes, without engaging the team in discussions about their experience or future roles. The correct answer is C. Facilitate a comprehensive team debriefing session to capture lessons learned, celebrate achievements, and formally acknowledge individual and collective contributions, while also outlining clear next steps for knowledge transfer and individual career transitions. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a leader to not only understand the theoretical stages of team development, but also to apply this knowledge pragmatically within a regulated environment. The Chartered Leadership Fellow, CLF, designation implies a responsibility to lead ethically and effectively, ensuring that team dynamics support, rather than hinder, the achievement of organizational objectives while adhering to professional standards. The challenge lies in balancing the human element of team development with the need for efficient and compliant operations, particularly when a team is transitioning out of a project. The correct approach involves proactively managing the adjourning stage by facilitating a structured and supportive transition. This includes acknowledging the team's contributions, debriefing on lessons learned, and ensuring a smooth handover of responsibilities. This approach aligns with ethical leadership principles that emphasize respect for individuals and their contributions, and it supports the organization's long-term learning and development by capturing valuable insights. While specific CLF regulations might not detail team adjournment, the overarching ethical and professional conduct expected of a CLF mandates responsible leadership during all phases of team lifecycle, including dissolution. This proactive management minimizes disruption, preserves knowledge, and maintains morale, which are all critical for sustained organizational success and professional reputation. An incorrect approach of simply disbanding the team without any formal process fails to acknowledge the team's efforts and the potential for knowledge loss. This can lead to decreased morale, a sense of being undervalued, and a failure to capture critical project insights, which indirectly impacts future project success and organizational efficiency. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of respect for the team's work. Another incorrect approach of focusing solely on the next project without addressing the current team's conclusion neglects the immediate needs of the team members and the organizational imperative to learn from past experiences. This can create a perception of the organization being transactional and uncaring, potentially damaging future team cohesion and trust. A third incorrect approach of allowing the team to naturally dissolve without any leadership intervention risks incomplete knowledge transfer, unresolved issues, and a lack of closure for team members. This can lead to inefficiencies in subsequent projects and a failure to meet professional standards of due diligence and responsible project management. The professional decision-making process for such situations involves recognizing the team's life cycle, anticipating the adjourning stage, and planning for a structured conclusion. This requires foresight, communication, and a commitment to ethical leadership that values both individual contributions and organizational learning. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing impatience with the current leadership's perceived lack of decisive action in response to emerging market shifts, with some influential clients expressing a desire for a more directive and assertive leadership style. As a Chartered Leadership Fellow, how should you adapt your approach to address this feedback while upholding your fiduciary responsibilities and regulatory obligations? Option A. Immediately adopt a more aggressive and directive leadership style across all interactions to demonstrate responsiveness to the feedback, prioritizing client satisfaction above all else. Option B. Reiterate the organization's established leadership principles and current strategic direction, informing stakeholders that the current approach is deemed optimal and no immediate changes are warranted. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the current leadership approach, engaging with key stakeholders to understand the specific concerns and collaboratively explore adaptive strategies that balance immediate needs with long-term organizational health and regulatory compliance. Option D. Implement minor cosmetic changes to communication protocols and meeting structures to give the appearance of responsiveness, without altering the core leadership methodology. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive review of the current leadership approach, engaging with key stakeholders to understand the specific concerns and collaboratively explore adaptive strategies that balance immediate needs with long-term organizational health and regulatory compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a leader to navigate conflicting stakeholder expectations and adapt their leadership style to a dynamic environment, all while adhering to the stringent ethical and regulatory standards expected of a chartered leadership fellow. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate demands of a vocal stakeholder group with the long-term strategic needs of the organization and the established governance frameworks. A leader must demonstrate agility in their approach without compromising integrity or regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a nuanced application of contingency theory, recognizing that a single leadership style is insufficient. This leader must first acknowledge and validate the stakeholder feedback, demonstrating empathy and a willingness to listen. Subsequently, they must analyze the feedback within the broader context of the organization's strategic objectives, risk appetite, and regulatory obligations. The leader should then engage in a transparent dialogue with the stakeholders, explaining the rationale behind any proposed adjustments to leadership or strategy, highlighting how these adjustments are informed by situational factors and align with the organization's fiduciary duties and ethical commitments. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes open communication, accountability, and a balanced consideration of all relevant factors, aligning with the professional conduct expected of CLFs who are bound by principles of integrity and responsible leadership. An incorrect approach would be to immediately capitulate to the loudest voices without due diligence. This fails to uphold the leader's responsibility to consider all stakeholders and the organization's long-term viability, potentially leading to decisions that are not strategically sound or compliant with regulatory requirements. Such a response could be seen as reactive rather than strategic, and may undermine the leader's credibility and the organization's governance. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the feedback outright, citing adherence to a predetermined leadership style or existing organizational policies without considering the validity or implications of the feedback. This demonstrates inflexibility and a lack of situational awareness, which are critical failings for a leader expected to adapt and evolve. It neglects the importance of stakeholder engagement and can lead to disengagement and a breakdown of trust. A third incorrect approach involves implementing superficial changes that do not address the underlying concerns raised by stakeholders. This approach is disingenuous and fails to demonstrate genuine leadership adaptation, can create a perception of tokenism, further eroding trust and failing to achieve the desired positive outcomes, potentially leading to ongoing dissatisfaction and a failure to meet ethical obligations of effective leadership. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with active listening and information gathering. This is followed by a thorough analysis of the situation, considering internal and external factors, including stakeholder perspectives, strategic goals, and regulatory constraints. The leader should then formulate a response that is adaptable, transparent, and ethically defensible, engaging in collaborative problem-solving where appropriate and communicating the rationale clearly to all relevant parties. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows a senior leader responsible for developing the annual budget for a financial services firm. The leader is considering several approaches to this task. Which approach best aligns with the principles of sound financial management and regulatory compliance for a chartered leadership fellow? Option A. conducting extensive consultations with all department heads to understand their strategic priorities and resource needs, followed by a rigorous analysis of market trends and the firm's overall financial objectives to allocate funds. Option B, allocating the majority of the budget to departments that have historically demonstrated high spending, assuming their needs are the most critical. Option C, primarily basing the budget on the previous year's expenditure, with minor adjustments for inflation and departmental requests. Option D, focusing solely on meeting the minimum regulatory capital requirements, with discretionary spending left to departmental discretion. Correct answer is C, primarily basing the budget on the previous year's expenditure, with minor adjustments for inflation and departmental requests. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a senior leader is tasked with developing the annual budget for a financial services firm. This is professionally challenging because budgeting is a critical process that directly impacts the firm's financial health, strategic direction, and operational capacity. Leaders must balance competing departmental needs, ensure compliance with regulatory requirements, and align the budget with the firm's overall objectives, all while facing potential economic uncertainties. Careful judgment is required to allocate resources effectively, manage risk, and maintain stakeholder confidence. The correct approach involves a collaborative and data-driven process that prioritizes strategic alignment and regulatory adherence. This entails engaging key stakeholders from all departments to understand their needs and projections, rigorously reviewing historical data and market trends, and clearly linking budget allocations to the firm's strategic goals. Furthermore, it requires incorporating robust risk assessment and contingency planning, ensuring all proposed expenditures comply with relevant financial regulations and internal policies. This method fosters transparency, accountability, and a realistic financial plan that supports sustainable growth and operational efficiency, aligning with the principles of sound financial management and fiduciary duty expected of a chartered leadership fellow. An approach that solely relies on historical spending patterns without critical review or strategic recalibration is incorrect. This failure to adapt to current market conditions or evolving strategic priorities can lead to inefficient resource allocation and missed opportunities, potentially violating the duty to act in the best interests of the firm and its stakeholders. An approach that prioritizes departmental requests without a thorough assessment of their strategic value or financial feasibility is also incorrect. This can result in an unbalanced budget, overspending in non-critical areas, and underfunding of strategic initiatives, undermining the firm's long-term viability and potentially breaching regulatory expectations for prudent financial management. An approach that bypasses internal financial controls or omits necessary risk assessments is fundamentally flawed. This disregard for established procedures and risk mitigation strategies exposes the firm to significant financial and reputational damage, directly contravening regulatory mandates for robust internal controls and risk management. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the firm's strategic objectives. This should be followed by comprehensive data gathering and analysis, including market intelligence and historical performance. Next, a collaborative budgeting process involving all relevant stakeholders is essential to ensure buy-in and accurate forecasting. Rigorous review and challenge of proposed expenditures against strategic priorities and financial constraints are critical. Finally, the budget must be integrated with risk management frameworks and subject to ongoing monitoring and adjustment. Question 6. The audit findings indicate that, while team performance metrics are being met, the leadership style employed by the senior manager is perceived by a significant portion of the team as overly demanding and lacking in genuine support, potentially leading to burnout and disengagement rather than sustainable motivation. Which of the following approaches best addresses these findings in a manner consistent with ethical leadership and fostering genuine transformational leadership? Option A. Disregard the audit findings as subjective feedback, attributing any perceived issues to individual team member performance rather than the leadership approach. Option B. Schedule an open and candid discussion with the senior manager to review the audit findings, explore the perceived impact of their leadership style, and collaboratively develop a plan for incorporating more supportive and empowering leadership behaviors, with a commitment to follow-up and accountability. Option C. Publicly acknowledge the audit findings and implement a new performance management system that strictly penalizes any perceived lack of motivation or engagement from team members, regardless of leadership influence. Option D. Initiate a series of team-building exercises and motivational workshops to reinforce the importance of achieving organizational goals, while privately instructing the senior manager to maintain current performance standards. Correct answer is D. Initiate a series of team-building exercises and motivational workshops to reinforce the importance of achieving organizational goals, while privately instructing the senior manager to maintain current performance standards. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a leader to navigate the delicate balance between achieving organizational objectives and upholding ethical standards, particularly when faced with evidence of potentially coercive or manipulative leadership tactics. The audit findings suggest a disconnect between stated leadership values and observed behaviors, necessitating a response that prioritizes integrity and compliance. Careful judgment is required to address the findings without undermining team morale or creating a defensive atmosphere. The correct approach involves a leader proactively engaging with the audit findings by initiating an open dialogue with the team about leadership expectations and the impact of their behavior. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of ethical leadership and fosters a culture of transparency and accountability, which are implicitly encouraged by regulatory frameworks governing professional conduct and organizational governance. By seeking to understand the team's perspective and committing to observable changes in leadership style, the leader demonstrates a willingness to adapt and improve, thereby reinforcing trust and inspiring genuine motivation. This proactive and communicative stance is crucial for maintaining a positive and compliant work environment, as it addresses potential ethical breaches before they escalate and ensures that leadership practices are aligned with established professional standards. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as subjective or irrelevant. This is ethically flawed because it disregards potential evidence of leadership behaviors that could be detrimental to employee well-being and organizational integrity, and it fails to acknowledge the responsibility of leadership to foster a positive and ethical work environment. Such a dismissal could also be seen as a failure to comply with implicit or explicit organizational policies that mandate responsiveness to audit outcomes and a commitment to ethical conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial changes or offer platitudes without genuine commitment to behavioral adjustment. This is professionally unacceptable, as it creates a facade of compliance while failing to address the root causes of the audit findings. It undermines trust and can lead to cynicism within the team, ultimately hindering transformational leadership and potentially violating ethical obligations to act with integrity and honesty. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on punitive measures against those who raised concerns or contributed to the audit findings. This is ethically problematic as it discourages open communication and feedback, creating a climate of fear and potentially retaliating against whistleblowers or those who provide honest assessments. Such an approach directly contradicts the principles of fostering a supportive and ethical workplace and could lead to regulatory scrutiny for creating a hostile work environment. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to understanding the full scope of the audit findings, engaging in open and honest communication with the team, seeking to understand the impact of leadership behaviors, and developing a concrete action plan for improvement that is communicated transparently. This process should be guided by a strong ethical compass, a commitment to regulatory compliance, and a focus on building a sustainable culture of trust and high performance. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates a persistent and escalating disagreement between the head of investment strategy and the chief risk officer regarding the allocation of capital for a new high-yield bond fund. The head of investment strategy believes the current allocation is too conservative and hinders potential returns, while the chief risk officer argues the proposed allocation significantly increases exposure to unacceptably high credit risk, potentially jeopardizing client capital and the firm's reputation. Both leaders have strong track records and significant influence within the organization. As a Chartered Leadership Fellow, CLF, overseeing both departments, how should you approach resolving this conflict to ensure both strategic growth and robust risk management, in line with regulatory expectations for responsible financial stewardship? Option A. Inform both leaders that their inability to agree is impacting performance and instruct them to resolve it independently, as it is a matter of departmental operational management. Option B. Escalate the issue directly to the board of directors, presenting only the chief risk officer's concerns about the potential for significant financial losses. Option C. Immediately implement the allocation proposed by the head of investment strategy, given their primary responsibility for generating returns, and instruct the chief risk officer to develop mitigation strategies for the increased risk. Option D. Facilitate a series of structured mediation sessions where both leaders can articulate their concerns, present supporting data, and collaboratively explore alternative allocation strategies that balance return objectives with risk tolerance, seeking a mutually agreeable solution. The correct answer is D. Facilitate a series of structured mediation sessions where both leaders can articulate their concerns, present supporting data, and collaboratively explore alternative allocation strategies that balance return objectives with risk tolerance, seeking a mutually agreeable solution. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a conflict between two senior leaders, each with significant influence and potentially differing strategic visions. The CLF, in a leadership role, is tasked with mediating this conflict not only to resolve the immediate dispute, but also to maintain team cohesion, operational efficiency, and adherence to the firm's ethical and regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in navigating the power dynamics, ensuring fairness, and guiding the parties towards a resolution that aligns with the firm's best interests and regulatory compliance, without appearing to take sides or overstepping their authority. The correct approach involves facilitating a structured dialogue where both parties can express their concerns and perspectives in a safe and neutral environment. This approach prioritizes active listening, identifying common ground, and collaboratively exploring solutions that address the underlying issues. This aligns with the CLF's responsibility to foster a positive and productive work environment, which is implicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that emphasize good governance and ethical conduct within financial services firms. By focusing on constructive dialogue and mutual understanding, the CLF upholds principles of fairness and integrity, essential for maintaining client trust and regulatory standing. An incorrect approach that involves immediately siding with one leader based on perceived seniority or past success fails to address the root cause of the conflict and can alienate the other party, potentially leading to further disengagement or resentment. This can create a toxic work environment, which indirectly contravenes the spirit of regulatory expectations for responsible management and can lead to operational inefficiencies. Another incorrect approach, such as avoiding the conflict altogether or delegating the resolution to a junior team member without proper oversight, demonstrates a lack of leadership and responsibility. This abdication of duty can allow the conflict to fester, negatively impacting team morale and productivity, and potentially leading to breaches of conduct or compliance issues that a responsible leader should proactively manage. Such inaction can be seen as a failure to uphold the duty of care expected of a CLF. Finally, imposing a solution without adequate consultation or understanding of both parties' viewpoints is likely to be perceived as autocratic and may not achieve sustainable resolution. This can undermine trust and collaboration, creating a precedent for future conflicts to be handled in a similarly dismissive manner, which is detrimental to a healthy organizational culture and can indirectly impact the firm's ability to meet its regulatory obligations by fostering an environment where issues are not openly addressed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Acknowledging the conflict and its potential impact. 2. Committing to a neutral and objective stance. 3. Facilitating open and respectful communication between the parties. 4. Guiding the parties to identify underlying interests and explore mutually beneficial solutions. 5. Documenting agreed-upon actions and follow-up. 6. Escalating if the conflict cannot be resolved at this level or if it poses a significant risk to the firm or its clients. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that significant cost savings and improved client response times can be achieved by automating several key client onboarding and advisory processes. However, the study also highlights that these automation initiatives will likely lead to a reduction in the need for certain client-facing roles and require a substantial shift in the skill sets of remaining staff. As a chartered leadership fellow responsible for guiding the firm through this transition, which of the following approaches best balances the pursuit of efficiency with the maintenance of a strong, ethical organizational culture and regulatory compliance? Option A. Introduce automation incrementally, making minor adjustments to existing roles and processes without a clear overarching strategy for cultural integration or employee development, relying on the inherent adaptability of the workforce to absorb the changes over time. Option B. Focus exclusively on the technological aspects of automation, outsourcing the implementation to external vendors and delegating responsibility for managing the human impact, thereby minimizing internal disruption and allowing existing management to concentrate on other strategic priorities. Option C. Implement a phased automation strategy that includes comprehensive retraining programs for affected staff, transparent communication about the changes and their rationale, and a robust feedback mechanism to address employee concerns and refine the new processes, ensuring that client service quality is maintained or enhanced. Option D. Prioritize the rapid deployment of automation technologies to achieve immediate cost reductions and competitive advantages, with minimal upfront investment in employee retraining or extensive communication, assuming staff will adapt to new roles or seek opportunities elsewhere. Correct answer is C. Implement a phased automation strategy that includes comprehensive retraining programs for affected staff, transparent communication about the changes and their rationale, and a robust feedback mechanism to address employee concerns and refine the new processes, ensuring that client service quality is maintained or enhanced. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the imperative to maintain a strong, ethical organizational culture, particularly in the context of change. The Chartered Leadership Fellow designation implies a responsibility to lead with integrity and to ensure that strategic initiatives align with regulatory expectations and ethical principles governing financial services. The core tension lies in how to implement process improvements without inadvertently eroding trust, employee morale, or compliance with relevant professional standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of efficiency does not lead to shortcuts that compromise client interests or regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves a comprehensive change management strategy that prioritizes clear communication, stakeholder engagement, and the integration of ethical considerations into the process optimization. This approach recognizes that sustainable efficiency gains are built on a foundation of trust and a shared understanding of organizational values. By involving employees in the redesign of processes, providing adequate training, and establishing mechanisms for feedback, leaders can foster a sense of ownership and mitigate resistance. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to clients and the regulatory expectation that firms operate with integrity and sound governance. Professional bodies often emphasize the importance of ethical leadership in driving change, ensuring that all actions are consistent with the public interest and the reputation of the profession. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction through automation without considering the impact on employee roles and client service would be ethically flawed. This could lead to job displacement without adequate support or retraining, potentially creating a culture of fear and disengagement. Such an approach might also overlook the nuances of client relationships, where human interaction is crucial, and could inadvertently lead to compliance breaches if automated processes are not robust enough to handle complex regulatory requirements or individual client needs. This would violate the principle of acting with due skill, care, and diligence, and could expose the firm to reputational damage and regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to implement changes top-down with minimal consultation, assuming that directives will be followed without question. This disregards the importance of employee buy-in and can foster resentment and a lack of commitment to the new processes. Ethically, it fails to respect the contributions and perspectives of employees, who are often best placed to identify practical challenges and opportunities for improvement. This can also lead to unintended consequences and a failure to achieve the desired efficiency gains, as employees may resist or subvert the changes. A third incorrect approach might involve prioritizing speed of implementation over thoroughness, leading to poorly designed or inadequately tested new processes. This could result in operational errors, increased risk, and a negative impact on client experience. From a regulatory perspective, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could lead to breaches of conduct rules designed to protect consumers and market integrity. It prioritizes a short-term objective over the long-term health and compliance of the organization. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to change management. This includes 1. Clearly defining the objectives of the process optimization and how they align with the firm's strategy and ethical commitments. 2. Conducting a thorough impact assessment, considering not only efficiency, but also the effects on employees, clients, and regulatory compliance. 3. Engaging stakeholders, including employees and potentially clients, in the design and implementation phases. 4. Developing a comprehensive communication and training plan. 5. Establishing clear metrics for success that include both efficiency and ethical considerations. And 6. Creating feedback mechanisms to monitor the effectiveness of the changes and address any emerging issues promptly. This holistic approach ensures that process optimization serves the broader interests of the organization, its stakeholders, and the integrity of the financial services sector. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a significant market shift necessitates a rapid adaptation of the organization's core service delivery model. To address this complex challenge effectively and responsibly, which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of adaptive leadership and regulatory compliance? Option A. Introduce incremental changes to the service delivery model based on anecdotal evidence and internal intuition, without formal testing or external validation. Option B. Wait for market feedback and competitor actions to fully materialize before considering any changes to the current model. Option C. Immediately implement a comprehensive overhaul of the service delivery model across the entire organization to gain a competitive advantage. Option D. Initiate a series of small-scale controlled pilot programs to test different adaptation strategies, with clear success metrics and ongoing regulatory consultation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a series of small-scale controlled pilot programs to test different adaptation strategies, with clear success metrics and ongoing regulatory consultation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a leader to navigate uncertainty and potential disruption while upholding ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The pressure to adapt quickly to evolving market conditions or unforeseen crises can tempt leaders to bypass established protocols or make decisions based on incomplete information. The Chartered Leadership Fellow designation implies a responsibility to lead with integrity, foresight, and a deep understanding of the regulatory landscape, especially when implementing adaptive strategies that inherently involve experimentation. The challenge lies in balancing the need for agility with the imperative to protect stakeholders, maintain market confidence, and adhere to all applicable laws and guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, iterative process of experimentation that prioritizes stakeholder well-being and regulatory adherence. This entails defining clear objectives for each experiment, establishing measurable outcomes, and implementing robust monitoring mechanisms. Crucially, it requires proactive engagement with relevant regulatory bodies and internal compliance functions to ensure that proposed experiments are within acceptable parameters and do not inadvertently create undue risk or violate existing regulations. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and adaptive leadership, where learning from controlled trials informs strategic adjustments while maintaining a strong ethical compass and a commitment to compliance. The focus is on controlled risk-taking, transparency, and continuous evaluation against both performance metrics and regulatory requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a broad, unmonitored rollout of a new strategy without prior experimentation or regulatory consultation represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach disregards the potential for unintended negative consequences on customers, employees, or the financial system, and it bypasses the opportunity to identify and mitigate risks through controlled testing. Such a lack of due diligence could lead to breaches of consumer protection laws, data privacy regulations, or financial conduct rules, resulting in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of stakeholder trust. Adopting a reactive stance, where adjustments are only made after significant negative impacts have occurred, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach demonstrates a failure in proactive risk management and adaptive leadership. It suggests a lack of foresight and a willingness to accept substantial harm before taking corrective action, which is contrary to the fiduciary duties and ethical obligations of a leader. This reactive posture can lead to regulatory scrutiny and sanctions for failing to act with reasonable care and diligence. Focusing solely on short-term gains or competitive advantage without considering the broader ethical implications or regulatory framework is another critical failure. This narrow perspective can lead to decisions that, while seemingly beneficial in the immediate term, create long-term systemic risks or violate principles of fair competition and market integrity. Leaders are expected to consider the wider impact of their decisions, not just immediate profitability, and to operate within the established legal and ethical boundaries. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing complex challenges requiring adaptive leadership should adopt a framework that integrates experimentation with rigorous oversight. This involves 1. Defining the problem and desired outcomes clearly. 2. Designing small-scale, controlled experiments with predefined success metrics. 3. Conducting thorough risk assessments for each experiment, considering potential impacts on all stakeholders. 4. Consulting with legal and compliance teams to ensure alignment with all relevant regulations and ethical guidelines. 5. Implementing experiments with robust monitoring and feedback mechanisms. 6. Analyzing results objectively and making data-driven decisions about scaling, iterating, or abandoning the initiative. 7. Maintaining transparency with stakeholders regarding the experimental nature of the initiative and its progress. This systematic and ethical approach ensures that adaptive leadership is conducted responsibly, minimizing harm and maximizing the potential for positive, sustainable change. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that a chartered leadership fellow is expected to foster an environment where team members feel empowered to voice concerns and challenge ideas without fear of negative repercussions. Considering this, which of the following leadership actions best exemplifies the creation of psychological safety and trust within a team, aligning with the principles of ethical leadership and regulatory expectations for responsible governance? Option A. Focusing primarily on individual performance metrics and rewarding those who strictly adhere to established procedures, without actively encouraging open dialogue about potential process improvements or risks. Option B. Prioritizing the rapid achievement of project milestones, even if it means discouraging lengthy discussions or the expression of dissenting opinions that might slow down progress. Option C. Implementing a system where only the most senior members' opinions are given significant weight, and junior members are encouraged to defer to their judgment to maintain efficiency. Option D. Consistently acknowledging and validating team members' contributions, actively soliciting diverse viewpoints, and establishing clear channels for constructive feedback and respectful disagreement. The correct answer is D. Consistently acknowledging and validating team members' contributions, actively soliciting diverse viewpoints, and establishing clear channels for constructive feedback and respectful disagreement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because fostering psychological safety and trust within a leadership team is foundational to effective decision-making, innovation, and ethical conduct, all of which are paramount for a chartered leadership fellow. The regulatory framework for financial services professionals, particularly those in leadership roles, emphasizes a duty of care and a responsibility to act with integrity. This includes creating an environment where team members feel safe to voice concerns, challenge assumptions, and admit mistakes without fear of retribution. Such an environment is not merely a matter of good management. It directly impacts the organization's ability to identify and mitigate risks, comply with regulations, and uphold its fiduciary duties. A lack of trust and psychological safety can lead to groupthink, suppressed dissent, and ultimately, poor strategic choices and potential regulatory breaches. The correct approach involves actively and consistently demonstrating vulnerability, encouraging open dialogue, and establishing clear processes for feedback and conflict resolution. This aligns with the principles of ethical leadership and the implicit regulatory expectation that leaders will cultivate a culture of transparency and accountability. Specifically, regulatory bodies often look for evidence of robust governance structures and a culture that supports ethical behavior and risk management. By creating a safe space for discussion, Leaders enable the early identification of potential compliance issues or ethical dilemmas, thereby fulfilling their supervisory responsibilities. This proactive approach is a hallmark of responsible leadership, ensuring that the organization operates within legal and ethical boundaries. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate task completion over team well-being fails to recognize the long-term benefits of psychological safety. This approach risks alienating team members, discouraging them from raising critical issues, and fostering an environment where mistakes are hidden rather than learned from. Such a culture can lead to significant compliance failures, as potential problems are not surfaced until they become major issues, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach that involves dismissing or penalizing dissenting opinions, even if they are perceived as disruptive, directly undermines trust. This behavior creates a climate of fear, where individuals are reluctant to share valuable insights or challenge flawed reasoning. This not only stifles innovation, but also creates blind spots for leadership, increasing the likelihood of strategic errors and regulatory noncompliance. The absence of open feedback mechanisms means that potential risks and ethical concerns may go unaddressed, leaving the organization vulnerable. A further incorrect approach that focuses solely on individual performance metrics without considering the team's collaborative environment neglects the interconnectedness of leadership responsibilities. While individual performance is important, a leader's primary role includes fostering an environment where the team as a whole can succeed ethically and effectively. Ignoring the psychological dynamics of the team can lead to burnout, disengagement, and a breakdown in communication, all of which can have serious repercussions for regulatory adherence and overall organizational integrity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a conscious effort to prioritize the creation and maintenance of a psychologically safe environment. This requires leaders to model desired behaviors, actively solicit diverse perspectives, and establish clear norms for respectful communication and constructive feedback. When faced with a situation that could compromise psychological safety, a leader should pause, consider the potential long-term impact on team dynamics and ethical conduct, and choose an action that reinforces trust and openness, even if it requires more time or effort in the short term. This proactive and people-centric approach is essential for navigating complex leadership challenges and ensuring sustained ethical and regulatory compliance. Question 11. The assessment process reveals a Chartered Leadership Fellow (CLF) candidate observing a peer's presentation. The candidate is asked to provide feedback on the peer's nonverbal communication. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates the CLF's expected competency in this area? Option A. Documenting specific instances of the presenter's posture, gestures, eye contact, and facial expression, and analyzing how these cues either supported or detracted from the clarity and impact of the verbal message. Option B. Focusing on the presenter's tendency to fidget with a pen, interpreting this as a sign of disinterest in the topic. Option C. Expressing a general feeling that the presenter seemed nervous and lacked confidence, based on a subjective impression of their overall demeanor. Option D. Concluding that the presenter's lack of direct eye contact indicates a dishonest or untrustworthy character. The correct answer is A. Documenting specific instances of the presenter's posture, gestures, eye contact, and facial expressions, and analyzing how these cues either supported or detracted from the clarity and impact of the verbal message. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a Chartered Leadership Fellow (CLF) candidate is tasked with evaluating a peer's presentation skills, specifically focusing on nonverbal communication. This is professionally challenging because assessing subjective elements like body language requires careful observation, objective interpretation, and the ability to provide constructive, actionable feedback without causing undue offense or misinterpretation. The CLF designation implies a responsibility to uphold high ethical standards and demonstrate sophisticated interpersonal and leadership competencies, including the nuanced understanding and application of nonverbal communication in professional settings. The correct approach involves a structured, objective observation of the presenter's nonverbal cues, correlating them with the verbal content and the overall effectiveness of the communication. This approach prioritizes factual observation over personal bias and aims to provide feedback that is both accurate and beneficial for the presenter's development. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a CLF to foster professional growth and maintain integrity in assessment. Specifically, it reflects the CLF's duty to conduct oneself with honesty and integrity, providing fair and objective evaluations. The focus on observable behaviors and their impact on communication effectiveness is paramount. An incorrect approach that relies solely on personal feelings or subjective impressions about the presenter's demeanor is professionally unacceptable. This fails to provide objective, evidence-based feedback and risks introducing personal bias, which is contrary to the principles of fair assessment and professional conduct. Such an approach could lead to inaccurate evaluations and hinder the presenter's development. Another incorrect approach that focuses on minor, irrelevant nonverbal habits without considering their impact on the overall message or audience engagement is also professionally flawed. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of how nonverbal cues function within the broader context of communication and leadership. It prioritizes trivial details over substantive communication effectiveness, failing to meet the standard of insightful leadership assessment expected of a CLF. A further incorrect approach that involves making definitive judgments about the presenter's personality or intentions based solely on nonverbal cues, without corroborating evidence, is ethically problematic. Nonverbal communication is complex and can be influenced by cultural factors, individual differences, and situational context. Drawing sweeping conclusions without sufficient data is a misapplication of observational skills and can lead to unfair and potentially damaging assessments. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a deliberate and systematic approach to observation and interpretation. This includes 1. Establishing clear criteria for evaluation, focusing on observable behaviors and their impact. 2. Maintaining objectivity by separating personal feelings from factual observations. 3. Considering the context of the communication, including the audience, purpose, and environment. 4. Correlating nonverbal cues with verbal messages to understand the complete communication picture. 5. Providing feedback that is specific, actionable, and constructive, focusing on behaviors that can be modified. 6. Recognizing the limitations of interpreting nonverbal cues and avoiding definitive pronouncements about personality or intent. Question 12. The audit findings indicate a significant lapse in client data handling protocols and the subsequent communication of strategic advice, leading to a potential breach of client confidentiality and regulatory noncompliance. As the team leader, how should you address this situation to ensure both immediate remediation and the prevention of future occurrences while upholding professional ethical standards? Option A. Downplay the significance of the audit findings to the team, focusing only on minor procedural adjustments to avoid causing undue alarm or disruption. Option B. Delegate the entire responsibility of addressing the audit findings to the team, trusting them to manage the situation and report back once resolved, without direct involvement. Option C. Issue a directive to the team outlining the specific corrective actions to be taken immediately, without further discussion, and assign individual accountability for each task. Option D. Convene a team meeting to discuss the audit findings openly. Facilitate a collaborative problem-solving session to revise protocols, and empower the team to implement the agreed-upon changes with your guidance. Correct answer is D. Convene a team meeting to discuss the audit findings openly. Facilitate a collaborative problem-solving session to revise protocols, and empower the team to implement the agreed-upon changes with your guidance. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a significant deviation from established client service standards, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive client information and the subsequent communication of strategic recommendations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the leader to balance immediate operational concerns with long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The leader must not only address the immediate lapse in judgment, but also implement corrective actions that reinforce a culture of integrity and client confidentiality, which are paramount in the financial services industry. The potential for reputational damage and regulatory sanctions necessitates a decisive and ethically grounded response. The correct approach involves a democratic leadership style, characterized by open communication, collaboration, and a focus on empowering the team to identify and implement solutions. This style fosters a sense of shared responsibility and encourages team members to voice concerns and contribute to problem solving. In this context, the leader should convene a meeting with the affected team, present the audit findings transparently, and facilitate a discussion to understand the root causes of the breach. The team should then collaboratively develop a revised protocol for handling client information and communication, with the leader providing guidance and support. This approach aligns with the ethical principles of transparency, accountability, and client welfare, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial advice and client data protection. It also promotes a learning environment, reinforcing best practices and mitigating future risks. An autocratic leadership approach, where the leader dictates the solution without team input, would be professionally unacceptable. This style stifles creativity, breeds resentment, and fails to address the underlying issues that led to the breach. It also signals a lack of trust in the team's ability to contribute to solutions, potentially leading to further disengagement and a recurrence of the problem. Ethically, it bypasses the principle of collaborative problem solving and can be perceived as a punitive rather than a developmental response. A laissez-faire leadership approach, where the leader abdicates responsibility and allows the team to manage the situation independently, would also be professionally unacceptable. This hands-off style would likely exacerbate the problem, as it fails to provide the necessary direction, oversight, and support to rectify the breach and implement robust preventative measures. It demonstrates a lack of leadership and accountability, potentially leading to further regulatory scrutiny and a breakdown in client trust. Ethically, it neglects the duty of care owed to clients and the responsibility to ensure compliance with professional standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Recognize and acknowledge the issue, promptly identify the problem and its potential ramifications. 2. Gather information, understand the full scope of the situation, including audit findings and team perspectives. 3. Assess ethical and regulatory implications. Determine how the situation impacts client trust, confidentiality, and compliance obligations. 4. Engage stakeholders. Involve the team in a constructive dialogue to understand root causes and collaboratively develop solutions. 5. Develop and implement a plan. Create a clear action plan with defined responsibilities and timelines, focusing on both immediate remediation and long-term prevention. 6. Monitor and review. Continuously assess the effectiveness of implemented solutions and make adjustments as needed. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a high-performing leadership team is experiencing friction due to unclear communication channels and differing expectations regarding individual contributions to collective projects. The team leader, a chartered leadership fellow, needs to optimize the team's process for collaboration and decision-making. Which of the following approaches best aligns with fostering a sustainable, high-functioning team dynamic while upholding professional standards? Option A. Implement a rigid hierarchical structure where all communication and task delegation are strictly managed by the leader, with minimal opportunity for team input on process. Option B. Focus exclusively on individual performance metrics and deadlines, assuming that team members will naturally adapt their communication and collaboration styles to meet these targets. Option C. Facilitate a team-wide workshop focused on collaboratively defining team roles, establishing clear communication protocols, and collectively agreeing upon working norms, with a commitment to regular review and adaptation. Option D. Encourage team members to resolve interpersonal conflicts independently, intervening only when performance is severely impacted, and avoiding direct discussion of team dynamics. The correct answer is C. Facilitate a team-wide workshop focused on collaboratively defining team roles, establishing clear communication protocols, and collectively agreeing upon working norms, with a commitment to regular review and adaptation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a leader to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics within a team to achieve optimal performance, while adhering to the ethical and professional standards expected of a chartered leadership fellow. The leader must balance individual contributions with collective goals, ensuring that communication is effective and that team roles are understood and leveraged. The pressure to meet performance targets can exacerbate existing tensions or create new ones, demanding a nuanced and principled approach. The correct approach involves actively facilitating open communication channels and encouraging the team to collectively define and refine their working norms and roles. This proactive stance ensures that potential conflicts are addressed before they escalate and that all team members feel heard and valued. This aligns with the ethical duty of a leader to foster a supportive and productive work environment, promoting collaboration and mutual respect. Specifically, within the regulatory framework governing professional conduct for individuals holding designations like the Chartered Leadership Fellow, there is an implicit and often explicit expectation to uphold principles of integrity, competence, and due care. This includes the responsible management of human capital and the creation of an environment conducive to ethical decision-making and effective teamwork. By encouraging open dialogue and collaborative norm setting, the leader is demonstrating a commitment to these principles, ensuring that team operations are transparent and that potential ethical breaches stemming from miscommunication or unclear roles are minimized. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on individual performance metrics without addressing underlying team dynamics fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of team members and their impact on overall success. This can lead to a breakdown in trust and collaboration, potentially creating an environment where unethical practices might arise due to pressure or lack of clear accountability. Ethically, this approach neglects the leader's responsibility to foster a healthy team culture. Another incorrect approach that involves imposing strict, top-down rules without team input can stifle creativity and alienate team members. While structure is important, a lack of buy-in from the team can lead to resentment and a decline in morale, indirectly impacting ethical conduct and performance. This approach fails to meet the professional standard of considering the human element in leadership and can be seen as a failure of due care in managing the team. A further incorrect approach that avoids addressing conflict directly, hoping it will resolve itself, is a significant ethical lapse. Unresolved conflict can fester, leading to a toxic work environment, decreased productivity, and potentially more serious issues, including breaches of professional conduct. This passive stance abdicates the leader's responsibility to manage team dynamics proactively and ethically. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of observation, assessment, and intervention. Leaders must first observe team interactions to identify patterns in communication, role allocation, and norm adherence. They should then assess the impact of these dynamics on team performance and ethical climate. Based on this assessment, leaders should intervene by facilitating discussions, clarifying expectations, and mediating conflicts, always with the goal of fostering a collaborative, transparent, and ethically sound team environment. This process is guided by the principles of professional responsibility, emphasizing proactive engagement and a commitment to the well-being and effectiveness of the team. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal that a company's financial performance analysis, as presented to the board of directors, primarily highlights significant increases in gross revenue over the past 2 fiscal years, while downplaying a concurrent decline in net profit margins and a substantial increase in short-term debt. Which of the following analytical approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical financial stewardship for a Chartered Leadership Fellow? Option A. Emphasizing the positive narrative of revenue growth and attributing any negative financial indicators to temporary market conditions or one-off events without detailed substantiation. Option B. Focusing the analysis solely on top-line revenue figures, as this is the most visible indicator of business expansion and market penetration. Option C. Conducting a thorough review of all key financial statements, including the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement, to analyze trends in revenue, profitability, operating expenses, and debt levels, comparing these against industry benchmarks and historical performance to identify any material deviations or concerning patterns. Option D. Accepting management's explanations for any unfavorable financial trends at face value, assuming their insights are sufficient to understand the company's financial position. Correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough review of all key financial statements, including the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement, to analyze trends in revenue, profitability, operating expenses, and debt levels, comparing these against industry benchmarks and historical performance to identify any material deviations or concerning patterns. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a leader to balance the imperative of accurate financial reporting with the potential for internal pressure to present a more favorable, albeit misleading, financial picture. The CLF designation implies a responsibility for ethical leadership and adherence to regulatory standards, particularly concerning financial analysis and disclosure. The core challenge lies in discerning genuine financial performance from potentially manipulated or selectively presented data, ensuring that stakeholders receive a true and fair view. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of financial statements, including an analysis of trends, ratios, and key performance indicators against industry benchmarks and historical performance. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework governing financial reporting, which mandates transparency and accuracy. Specifically, adherence to accounting standards e.g., GAAP or IFRS, depending on the jurisdiction specified for the CLF exam, which is assumed to be U.S.-based for this example, and securities regulations e.g., SEC rules, requires that financial performance be presented without material misstatement or omission. Ethical principles also demand that leaders act in the best interest of all stakeholders, which includes providing them with reliable financial information for informed decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on revenue growth, without considering profitability or cash flow. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for a holistic view of financial health and can be misleading to investors and creditors. It violates the principle of fair presentation, as a company can show revenue growth through unsustainable practices or by incurring significant losses. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss negative trends in operating expenses as mere fluctuations without further investigation. This neglects the regulatory obligation to identify and disclose significant changes that could impact future profitability and financial stability. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise due diligence and a potential attempt to obscure underlying issues. A third incorrect approach would be to rely exclusively on management's narrative or explanations for financial results without independent verification or critical analysis. This bypasses the fundamental responsibility of a leader to ensure the integrity of financial information. Regulatory frameworks often require independent audits and oversight to prevent such reliance on potentially biased internal reporting. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of skepticism and a failure to uphold fiduciary duties. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to objective analysis, a thorough understanding of applicable accounting and regulatory standards, and a willingness to challenge assumptions and seek further information when discrepancies arise. Leaders must foster a culture of transparency and accountability, where financial data is scrutinized rigorously and presented truthfully, even when it reveals unfavorable performance. This involves utilizing a range of analytical tools and techniques, cross-referencing data, and engaging with internal and external experts as needed to ensure the accuracy and completeness of financial reporting. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Chartered Leadership Fellow, CLF, observes a pattern of behavior within their department that appears to violate the company's code of conduct and potentially regulatory guidelines concerning client data handling. The CLF is aware of the potential negative consequences of reporting such behavior, including strained relationships with colleagues and possible career repercussions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CLF to take? Option A. Ignore the behavior, assuming it is a minor issue or will resolve itself over time. Option B. Report the observed behavior through the company's designated internal whistleblowing channel or to the compliance department. Option C. Immediately disclose the observed behavior to external media outlets to ensure public awareness. Option D. Confront the individuals involved directly and informally to discuss their actions. The correct answer is B. Report the observed behavior through the company's designated internal whistleblowing channel or to the compliance department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between loyalty to an organization and the ethical imperative to report misconduct. A leader in the Chartered Leadership Fellow, CLF designation, is expected to uphold the highest standards of integrity and compliance. The difficulty lies in navigating the potential personal and professional repercussions of whistleblowing, while ensuring that serious ethical breaches are addressed. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests and act in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound. The correct approach involves discreetly reporting the observed unethical behavior through the established internal channels, such as the compliance department or a designated ethics hotline, as mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial services and corporate governance. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principle of escalating concerns through appropriate organizational mechanisms, which are designed to investigate and rectify such issues without undue disruption or premature disclosure. Regulatory bodies, such as those overseeing financial institutions, often mandate the existence and utilization of such internal reporting systems as a primary step in addressing misconduct. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the responsibility to maintain a transparent and compliant business environment. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the behavior, fearing repercussions, or believing it is not significant enough to warrant action. This is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable because it constitutes a failure to act on observed misconduct, potentially allowing it to continue and escalate, thereby violating the leader's duty to uphold ethical standards and comply with regulations. It also undermines the integrity of the organization and could expose it to greater legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately disclose the unethical behavior to external parties, such as the media or regulatory bodies, without first attempting to resolve it through internal channels. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses established procedures designed for fair investigation and resolution. Such premature external disclosure can be detrimental to the organization, potentially leading to unwarranted reputational damage, legal complications, and an inability for the organization to address the issue internally in a controlled manner. It may also be seen as a breach of confidentiality and loyalty, unless internal channels have been exhausted or are demonstrably ineffective or complicit. A further incorrect approach would be to confront the individuals involved directly and informally without involving the appropriate internal oversight. While direct communication can sometimes resolve minor issues, in cases of significant unethical behavior, this can be ineffective, lead to denial or retaliation, and fail to trigger the necessary formal investigation and corrective actions. It also risks compromising any subsequent formal investigation by alerting the perpetrators and potentially destroying or altering evidence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's internal policies on reporting misconduct, including the availability and function of ethics hotlines or compliance departments. Professionals should assess the severity and nature of the observed behavior against relevant ethical codes and regulatory requirements. If the behavior appears to be a serious breach, the primary step should be to utilize the designated internal reporting mechanisms. If these channels are unresponsive or themselves compromised, then escalation to external regulatory bodies may become necessary. But this should be a carefully considered step after exhausting internal options, or if there is a clear and present danger that necessitates immediate external intervention. The focus should always be on achieving a resolution that upholds ethical principles and regulatory compliance, while protecting the integrity of the organization and its stakeholders. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that the organization needs to adopt a new digital platform to enhance operational efficiency and client service. However, initial discussions with departmental heads reveal significant apprehension among staff regarding job security and the learning curve associated with the new technology. As a chartered leadership fellow, which of the following approaches would best navigate this resistance while upholding ethical leadership principles? Option A. Acknowledge the resistance as a natural reaction and proceed with the change as planned, relying on existing management structures to enforce compliance. Option B. Initiate a series of town hall meetings to openly discuss the proposed changes, actively solicit feedback on concerns, and form cross-departmental working groups to co-develop implementation strategies and support mechanisms. Option C. Focus on the technical implementation of the new platform, assuming that once the system is in place, employees will adapt out of necessity. Option D. Implement a mandatory training program for all staff, clearly outlining the benefits of the new platform and setting firm deadlines for adoption, with consequences for non-compliance. The correct answer is D. Implement a mandatory training program for all staff, clearly outlining the benefits of the new platform and setting firm deadlines for adoption, with consequences for non-compliance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the strategic imperative for change with the human element of employee resistance. A leader must navigate the potential disruption to operations and morale while ensuring compliance with ethical obligations and fostering a sustainable future for the organization. The CLF designation implies a responsibility for ethical leadership and strategic foresight, making the approach to managing change a critical aspect of their role. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes of resistance and implement solutions that are both effective and principled. The correct approach involves a proactive and empathetic engagement strategy. This entails clearly communicating the rationale for the change, actively listening to employee concerns, and involving stakeholders in the solution development process. This aligns with principles of good governance and ethical leadership, which emphasize transparency, fairness, and respect for individuals. By fostering a collaborative environment, leaders can mitigate resistance, build trust, and ensure a smoother transition, ultimately contributing to the long-term success and stability of the organization, which is a core tenet of leadership development. An approach that dismisses employee concerns as mere stubbornness is ethically flawed. It fails to acknowledge the legitimate anxieties and potential impacts of change on individuals and their livelihoods. This can lead to a breakdown in trust and a perception of unfair treatment, potentially violating implicit employment agreements and fostering a negative organizational culture. Such a stance also ignores the practical reality that resistance, if unaddressed, can significantly hinder the successful implementation of any change initiative, leading to operational inefficiencies and reputational damage. An approach that focuses solely on the technical aspects of the change without addressing the human impact is also problematic. While technical proficiency is important, neglecting the psychological and social dimensions of change can create significant friction. This can lead to a failure to achieve the desired outcomes due to a lack of buy-in and cooperation from the workforce. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of consideration for the well-being of employees, who are integral to the organization's success. An approach that imposes the change without any consultation or consideration for feedback is likely to generate significant resistance and can be perceived as autocratic. This can undermine employee morale and engagement, leading to decreased productivity and increased turnover. From an ethical standpoint, it fails to uphold principles of participation and respect for individuals, which are fundamental to responsible leadership and good governance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the nature and scope of the proposed change. 2. Anticipate potential sources and forms of resistance by considering the perspectives of all affected stakeholders. 3. Develop a comprehensive communication plan that explains the why behind the change and addresses potential concerns. 4. Establish mechanisms for feedback and dialogue, actively listening to and acknowledging employee input. 5. Involve key stakeholders in the planning and implementation phases where appropriate, fostering a sense of ownership. 6. Develop strategies to support employees through the transition, including training and resources. 7. Monitor the change process and be prepared to adapt strategies based on ongoing feedback and observed impacts. Question 17. System analysis indicates that a UK-based financial services firm is planning a significant digital transformation initiative that will fundamentally alter its client service delivery model and internal operational processes. The firm's leadership must develop a strategy for engaging its diverse stakeholder groups, including retail clients, institutional investors, employees, and the board of directors, to ensure a smooth and compliant transition. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical considerations for stakeholder engagement in this context? Option A. Implement a standardized, high-level communication plan for all stakeholder groups, focusing primarily on the technological benefits and efficiency gains of the digital transformation. Option B. Develop a tailored engagement strategy for each stakeholder group, involving proactive communication, targeted consultation, and feedback mechanisms that address their specific interests, concerns, and regulatory information requirements, ensuring transparency and fairness. Option C. Prioritize engagement with the board of directors and institutional investors, providing them with detailed strategic information, while relying on automated client communications and internal memos for employees and retail clients. Option D. Postpone detailed engagement with retail clients and employees until the core technological infrastructure is fully implemented, to avoid confusion and manage expectations during the development phase. Correct answer is A. Implement a standardized, high-level communication plan for all stakeholder groups, focusing primarily on the technological benefits and efficiency gains of the digital transformation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the strategic imperative of change with the ethical and regulatory obligations to inform and involve diverse stakeholder groups. As a chartered leadership fellow, demonstrating leadership in change management necessitates not only understanding the technical aspects of the change, but also navigating the human and relational dynamics, ensuring transparency and fostering trust. The challenge lies in identifying the appropriate level and method of engagement for each stakeholder group, considering their potential impact, interest, and influence, while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing financial services in the UK, particularly the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook and relevant Companies Act provisions. The correct approach involves a tiered and tailored stakeholder engagement strategy. This means proactively identifying all relevant stakeholders, assessing their interests and potential impact, and then developing communication and consultation plans that are proportionate and appropriate to their level of influence and the nature of the change. For significant changes impacting clients, this would involve clear, timely, and accessible communication regarding the implications for their services, fees, or product offerings, aligning with FCA principles of treating customers fairly (TCF), and providing clear information. For employees, engagement would focus on their roles, training needs, and potential impacts on their work, adhering to employment law and fostering a positive internal culture. For shareholders and the board, engagement would be more strategic, focusing on the rationale, risks, and expected outcomes of the change, ensuring compliance with corporate governance requirements. This approach prioritizes transparency, fairness, and accountability, which are fundamental to regulatory compliance and ethical leadership in the UK financial services sector. An incorrect approach would be to adopt a one-size-fits-all communication strategy. This fails to acknowledge the diverse needs and expectations of different stakeholder groups. For instance, providing the same level of detail to retail investors as to institutional investors would be inefficient and potentially confusing, failing to meet the specific information requirements of each group, and potentially breaching regulatory obligations for clear and fair communication. Another incorrect approach is to delay or omit communication with certain stakeholder groups, particularly those who might express dissent or concern. This can lead to a breakdown in trust, reputational damage, and potential regulatory sanctions for failing to act with integrity and transparency. For example, failing to adequately consult with employees on changes that significantly affect their working conditions could lead to industrial relations issues and breaches of employment law. Similarly, withholding material information from shareholders regarding a significant strategic shift could violate company law and listing rules. A further incorrect approach is to engage stakeholders only after decisions have been made, presenting them as fait accompli. This superficial engagement undermines the principle of genuine consultation and can alienate stakeholders, making them resistant to change. It also fails to leverage the valuable insights and perspectives that stakeholders can offer during the decision-making process, potentially leading to suboptimal outcomes and missed opportunities for risk mitigation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic stakeholder analysis, followed by the development of a comprehensive engagement plan. This plan should outline the objectives of engagement for each stakeholder group, the methods of communication and consultation, the timing of engagement, and the feedback mechanisms. It requires a proactive, ethical, and legally compliant approach, ensuring that all relevant parties are informed, consulted where appropriate, and treated with respect throughout the change process. Question 18. Strategic planning requires continuous monitoring of progress and adaptation to evolving circumstances. As a chartered leadership fellow overseeing a major strategic initiative, you have observed initial positive results exceeding projections. Which approach best ensures ongoing strategic success and regulatory compliance? Option A. Rely on informal team discussions and anecdotal evidence to gauge the initiative's overall health and identify any emerging concerns. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of potential threats to the initiative's long-term viability and develop contingency plans, even amidst early positive outcomes. Option C. Focus exclusively on amplifying the successful aspects of the initiative and reporting these positive results to stakeholders to build momentum. Option D. Prioritize immediate, short-term performance metrics that demonstrate rapid achievement of initial goals, deferring deeper risk analysis to a later stage. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of potential threats to the initiative's long-term viability and develop contingency plans, even amidst early positive outcomes. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a leader to balance proactive risk management with the dynamic nature of strategic execution. The pressure to demonstrate immediate progress can sometimes overshadow the need for thorough risk assessment and contingency planning, leading to potential compliance breaches or strategic missteps. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk evaluation is not a perfunctory exercise, but an integral part of ongoing strategic monitoring. The correct approach involves a systematic and ongoing assessment of potential risks that could impede the achievement of strategic objectives, coupled with the development of mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and fiduciary duty expected of a chartered leadership fellow. Specifically, regulatory frameworks often mandate that organizations have robust risk management processes in place to safeguard client interests and maintain financial stability. This proactive stance ensures that potential threats are identified early, allowing for timely adjustments to the strategy or the implementation of controls, thereby minimizing adverse impacts and ensuring compliance with regulatory expectations for prudent management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on celebrating early successes without a concurrent, rigorous risk assessment fails to acknowledge the inherent uncertainties in strategic execution. This can lead to a false sense of security and a neglect of potential pitfalls, which could later result in significant financial losses, reputational damage, or regulatory sanctions for failing to exercise due diligence. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate, short-term gains over a comprehensive understanding of underlying risks is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to decisions that are not sustainable in the long run and may inadvertently create new risks or exacerbate existing ones. Such a focus can contravene regulatory requirements for long-term viability and responsible business conduct. A further incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or informal feedback for risk identification, rather than structured analysis, is insufficient. This can result in overlooking critical systemic risks that are not immediately apparent through casual observation, thereby failing to meet the standards of professional diligence and potentially exposing the organization to unforeseen liabilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous feedback loop where strategic progress is regularly reviewed against defined key performance indicators, KPI, and risk registers. This process should incorporate both quantitative data and qualitative insights, with a clear escalation path for identified risks. Leaders must foster a culture where open discussion of potential challenges is encouraged, and where risk mitigation is integrated into every stage of strategic implementation, ensuring alignment with regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that a financial services firm is experiencing a disconnect between its stated commitment to client centricity and observed behaviors within its sales teams. As a chartered leadership fellow, you are tasked with leading a culture transformation initiative. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical best practices for fostering a desired organizational culture? Option A. Implement a comprehensive program that includes visible leadership endorsement, clear articulation of client-centric behaviors, mandatory ethical training, and the integration of these behaviors into performance reviews and reward structures. Option B. Launch a firm-wide communication campaign emphasizing the importance of client centricity, with posters and internal memos highlighting the company's values. Option C. Focus primarily on increasing sales targets and incentivizing aggressive sales tactics, assuming that financial success will naturally foster a positive client experience. Option D. Introduce a mandatory annual ethics quiz that employees must pass, without making significant changes to existing sales processes or leadership accountability. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive program that includes visible leadership endorsement, clear articulation of client-centric behaviors, mandatory ethical training, and the integration of these behaviors into performance reviews and reward structures. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of aligning a firm's stated values with its actual operational practices, particularly when seeking to foster a culture of ethical conduct and client centricity. Leaders must navigate the potential for cultural inertia, resistance to change, and the risk of superficial adoption of new behaviors without genuine commitment. The CLF designation implies a responsibility to uphold the highest ethical standards and regulatory compliance, making the integrity of culture transformation a paramount concern. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that integrates leadership commitment, clear communication of desired behaviors, robust training programs, and the establishment of accountability mechanisms. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with regulatory expectations for financial services firms to operate with integrity and in the best interests of their clients. Specifically, it addresses the need for a tone from the top that is consistently reinforced through tangible actions and embedded into performance management systems. This proactive and comprehensive method ensures that the transformation is not merely symbolic, but deeply ingrained in the organizational fabric, thereby mitigating risks of misconduct and fostering trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on communication, without reinforcing it through leadership actions or accountability mechanisms, fails to create genuine change. This can lead to a perception of hypocrisy, undermining trust, and potentially violating regulatory principles that require firms to have effective systems and controls in place to prevent misconduct. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term financial gains over ethical considerations or client well-being directly contravenes regulatory mandates and ethical duties. This can result in significant reputational damage, regulatory sanctions, and a breakdown of client confidence. A third incorrect approach that relies on superficial training or token gestures without addressing underlying systemic issues or leadership behaviors is unlikely to achieve sustainable culture transformation. This approach risks creating a compliance-only mindset rather than fostering a genuine commitment to ethical conduct, leaving the organization vulnerable to future ethical lapses. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the current culture and identifies specific areas for improvement. This should be followed by the development of a clear vision for the desired culture, articulated through actionable behaviors. Leaders must then champion this vision through consistent messaging and personal example. Implementation should involve a blend of education, reinforcement of desired behaviors, and the establishment of robust feedback and accountability systems. Regular evaluation of progress and adaptation of strategies are crucial to ensure the long-term success of culture transformation initiatives. Question 20. What factors determine the most effective leadership interventions for a team navigating the various stages of team development, ensuring both project success and long-term team cohesion within a regulated financial services environment? Option A. The immediate pressure to meet project deadlines and the perceived urgency of the tasks, prioritizing speed over team process. Option B. Leaders' personal leadership style and their prior experience with similar projects, regardless of the team's current dynamics. Option C. The individual performance metrics of each team member, focusing solely on individual contributions rather than collective team progress. Option D. The specific developmental stage of the team, the nature of the project goals, and the organizational culture's emphasis on collaboration and psychological safety. Correct answer is D. The specific developmental stage of the team, the nature of the project goals, and the organizational culture's emphasis on collaboration and psychological safety. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a leader must balance the immediate need for project completion with the long-term health and effectiveness of their team. Ignoring the natural progression of team development stages can lead to unresolved conflicts, decreased productivity, and high turnover, all of which have significant implications for the organization's financial stability and reputation. Careful judgment is required to identify the current stage and apply appropriate leadership intervention without stifling progress or creating unnecessary friction. The correct approach involves recognizing that effective team leadership necessitates adapting strategies to the specific developmental stage of the team. This means understanding the characteristics of forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, and implementing interventions that support the team's transition through these phases. For instance, during the storming phase, A leader must facilitate open communication and conflict resolution, rather than suppressing dissent or imposing solutions without team input. This aligns with ethical leadership principles that emphasize fostering a collaborative and respectful work environment, and regulatory frameworks that often mandate fair treatment and due process for employees. By actively managing team dynamics, leaders uphold their fiduciary duty to the organization by ensuring optimal team performance and mitigating risks associated with team dysfunction. An incorrect approach would be to assume that all teams operate at the performing stage, or to apply a one-size-fits-all leadership style. For example, attempting to push a team through the storming phase by demanding immediate consensus without addressing underlying conflicts ignores the psychological safety and trust building required for effective collaboration. This can lead to resentment, disengagement, and a failure to meet objectives, potentially violating organizational policies on employee well-being and creating an environment where constructive feedback is suppressed. Another incorrect approach is to prematurely disband a team that has completed a project without acknowledging the adjourning stage. Failing to provide closure, recognize contributions, and debrief effectively can damage morale, hinder future team formation, and lead to a loss of valuable institutional knowledge, which indirectly impacts the organization's long-term viability and compliance with best practices in human capital management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with accurate assessment of the team's current developmental stage. This involves active observation of team interactions, communication patterns, and the level of trust and cohesion present. Following this assessment, leaders should select leadership strategies that are congruent with the identified stage, focusing on facilitating progress rather than imposing rigid structures. This iterative process of assessment and adaptation, grounded in an understanding of team dynamics and ethical leadership, is crucial for sustained team success and organizational health.